You are listening to the Ion New York podcast for Tuesday, September 7th, 2021. I'm Robert Harding, the Citizen's Politics Reporter, and this podcast is presented by the Citizen. Today's guest is Mark Spadafore, the president of the Greater Syracuse Labor Council. This has become a tradition of sorts. Mark joins me around Labor Day to discuss the state of the labor movement here in central New York and really across the country. So, a great interview, a discussion about a whole host of labor related issues, and I'll get right to the interview. And then on the other side, I'll discuss the future of the podcast and a note about me and my self imposed Twitter break. I'd like to welcome Mark Spadafore, the president of the Greater Syracuse Labor Council, back to the podcast. Of course, our special Labor Day episode. It's really an annual tradition at this point. I think this is our third year of doing it.
Our third
Uh,
year, absolutely.
always great to chat with Mark. So, Mark, this Labor Day, especially after all that we continue to go through. We did talk last year about the effects of COVID, certainly for the labor movement. But what are some of the, I guess, continuing issues related to the pandemic that especially labor folks in Central New York have to deal with?
Well, it's a bunch of things because the Delta variant. I mean, because it looked like for a while we were going to get out of this, and then the Delta variant happened, and now we're seeing, just what's happening out in the community. These high infection rates, and it's causing us to cut back again. And that is, from a organizational standpoint, it's frustrating because we were talking about going back in-person meetings, getting off of Zoom, or at least a hybrid. So that's very frustrating, especially trainings. We wanted to really get more into trainings for union members in person, but it has to go back to virtual now. And it's affected us, as you're seeing at the state fair. We ended up canceling the Labor Day parade, which was so disappointing. We look forward to doing it, and we thought this year we'd be back. We actually had Tom DiNapoli, the comptroller of the state of New York, who was going to be our special guest for the parade, and now it's just we just didn't feel it was safe. And I'll be honest with you, I mean we're a collection. We're the umbrella organization for the unions, and it was the unions itself that said, look, we can't participate. We can't put our members there, and the last thing we want to do is is put our members in a situation where they don't feel safe or that they could get sick. And because the Delta variant is real, and not only that, but I have counterparts down in Florida who tell me about the Lambda and Epsilon variants. So who knows when we'll see those. So in the very immediate, that's the way it's affecting us. But COVID is really, I think, if you look at nationally, but even locally, it's gotten to the point where workers have just had enough with employers. Workers are just basically like, you're seeing it at the strike now at Nabisco. You saw it at the strike with Frito-Lay. You saw it even with the Amazon organizing both in Alabama and elsewhere in the country. Workers are just basically saying, we've had enough. And the interesting thing is that, you heard this time and time again about, because of the enhanced unemployment benefits from the federal government, workers don't want to work. Well, the 26 states that ended the enhanced benefits early, before the September deadline, did not see an uptick, in people going back to work. So it wasn't that people were just lazy and didn't just want to sit home and collect these enhanced benefits. It's that workers are really fed up, and that they don't want to go back to work for the low wages that they've had all along. I mean, the pandemic has just really just made everybody go enough.
With the, you mentioned something I did want to get your thoughts on this whole issue of the workforce shortage and what's causing it, what's not causing it. I guess from a labor standpoint, what do you think are some of the causes there? And I did find it interesting reading a story recently. I forget which outlet it ran in, but talking about that, even though that there is this workplace shortage, where you're seeing growth is actually among union membership. That union membership seems to be picking up in some areas. So I guess what's your view on what's happening there with that?
Um, well, I mean, let me say this is that, when they talk about a shortage, especially in, kind of, traditionally lower wage jobs, there's not a wage, it's not a labor shortage, it's a wage shortage. It's that basically, you had a lot of employers I don't want to I don't want people to think I'm picking on the kind of the mom and pop sub shop down at the corner that everybody loves, that's family owned and what have you. We're talking the Walmarts, we're talking the Amazons, we're talking the big corporations that can afford to pay more, that aren't paying more. And that's why you're seeing a lot of these people going, hey, we need people. Because a lot of workers are like, I'm not going to give up time with my family. I'm not going to give up time in my life just to go work for you in a miserable place where I'm going to be, because we spend more time at work than we do with our own families. And so, if I'm going to be doing that, I want to at least, know that I'm appreciated. And how you appreciate it is you pay me, and even I find workers, especially could find this a lot with unions, they'll take less than the paycheck as long as they got good benefits. And actually the benefits a lot of times, especially healthcare, retirement, those are the things that really show how much you care, because those are, health benefits are expensive. Pension benefits are expensive. But that's why they'll take less than the paycheck. But if you're showing me that you're going to willing to spend money there, then you're going to have workers that are willing to work for you, willing to be productive, willing to do what they needed. So, and I'll say this, I'll give you a good example. This past Friday, down in Corning, New York, Corning Inc. was saying, we can't find people to fill these positions. So the union said, you want to know something? We're going to actually do a job fair, and they have this huge union hall right in the middle of Corning, right at the end of Market Street, where they, all the big commercial places. And they went from 9 o'clock until 6 o'clock at night, and they said they had hundreds of people go through. Now, will Corning hire all of them? I don't know. But if you, in a place like Corning, New York, have those type of events happening, and people are just coming through, yes, I will go to work for you. Well, then, yeah, people are willing to work. Well, why are they going to work at Corning? Well, Corning has good wages and benefits. So that's what you have to do. So that's why, the premise that there's a worker shortage, I'm like, well, worker shortage for what you're willing to pay.
There was some news recently, and I know that this, really we're talking the nationwide labor movement here. The sudden death of, Richard Trumka, of course, who was the longtime AFL-CIO president. How much of a blow was that to hear that news? Because I know that he certainly made an impact as a labor leader. Even before rising to that national post, he certainly had a long career as a labor leader, starting out in the mines and
Yeah.
working his way up to the AFL-CIO president.
Yeah, Rich has a very interesting career. Because like you said, he was a coal miner, came from a coal miner family, Western Pennsylvania. And he did, he was this big guy. He shook his hand. It was like one of those big, huge hands that would like kind of engulf yours. But I mean, he used the educational benefits that he got from his union contract and went to school. So he would work and then go to school, and he became a lawyer. And then he was a staff lawyer. Then he ended up running for, office of the United Mine Workers. And really, his career, if you look at it, is a career of two Rich Trumkas, because him as the president of the United Mine Workers he was considered a radical, very much a radical. He said in the late 80s, as we talk about, like, today, the labor was pushing for the passage of the PRO Act, the Protect the Right to Organize Act is the acronym. But he said that we should get rid of the NLRB, which is the law right now that does protect private sector workers. Because his thing is, it's like, it doesn't work for workers. So we should just start over again, just to scrap the whole thing, which is a radical position to take. And especially in the late 80s, that was a very radical position. And, the Pittston strike and some of the other big national strikes, he, built a lot of international coalitions and what have you. And then the slate that he was elected to with John Sweeney and Linda Chavez Thompson with the AFL-CIO was very much a reformer slate, and it was like, you know, the second contested election for the American labor movement, and very much for a reformer, and it was a big deal for reformers to be elected. But when he became president, though, it was almost like he wasn't that radical guy. And he didn't push for a lot of big fundamental changes. So so I think his legacy overall is kind of a I don't want to say mixed, because he was a solid trade unionist, and he did do good things at the AFL-CIO. For example, when Barack Obama was first nominated to be president in 2008, and the AFL-CIO endorsed him, he had this speech that, especially in the, kind of internet 1.0, went viral on YouTube. It was a speech where he called out white union members on their racism. And he goes, there's no good reason why you can't support Barack Obama. The only reason why you're not going to is because he's black. And for him to call out because we don't do this well in the labor movement. We don't call out our own in a good way. And I give him a lot of credit for doing that. But I mean, but as he went along in the presidency, he was very much kind of a status quo kind of guy. So it was kind of interesting in a lot of ways. But now we have this very exciting moment where you have a woman heading the labor movement now. Liz Shuler, she comes out of the the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the IBEW. And also then we also have an African-American in the number 2 spot in the Secretary Treasurer. So, I mean, the labor movement has been, it takes a long time sometimes to change, but it has changed. And I think that it's unfortunate how it happened with Rich, passing unexpectedly, but it's an exciting moment right now. And there's a lot of possibilities. I'm excited for a Liz Shuler leadership.
With the PRO Act, because you mentioned that, I know that I believe the House took that up earlier this year. Of course, now all eyes are on the Senate. For those who might be listening,
seems to be a theme for many issues.
Yeah, as long as I've been covering, various Congress members in our region, it's always a thing like, oh, I have this bill and it passed the House, but
it dies in the Senate. Yes, I know.
So with the PRO Act, I wanted to get your perspective on this. Really, why is this important? Why is this needed?
Listen, absolutely, it is needed. The frustrations that workers are facing today is the reality is that they have no recourse. And the laws are so stacked for employers right now under the National Labor Relations Act, that workers rarely have a fair shake. If they want to form a union, so let's say you at the Auburn Citizen wants to form a union, you would have to, basically contact an organizer. You would have to talk to your coworkers. You have to pass cards in order to show interest. And then you would go to the National Labor Relations Board and they, and show the interest. In the meantime, though, the employer has unfettered access to the employees. In fact, that's what they found with the Amazon election down in Alabama, that they broke the law. But at the end of the day, what the remedy in the law is going to be? It's going to be that that the employer has to post on the employee bulletin boards, yes, we broke the law, and they might rerun an election. But at the end of the day, anyone who was in that election before, it's a different workforce now. So if you're a union organizer, you're starting from almost ground zero, trying to figure out, okay, who still work here, who doesn't work here, what have you. You're just always scrambling, trying to figure out who, it'd be like if I was running a political campaign and I didn't know where my voters were. Oh, wait, it's not this person. Oh, they don't work here anymore. Oh, wait, who's this? Okay, who's talked to that person? Workers have to go through this Herculean, and in the meantime, employers are pummeling them with unions are bad. They're only after your dues. They're corrupt. They're dying on the vine. They don't, and by the way, if they get in, you're not going to get a thing. We're not going to agree to anything. So why bother? It's like, and after a while, most workers are kind of like, enough. All right, this isn't worth it. I'm just going to quit and go find another bad job somewhere else. The PRO Act would change that. the PRO Act would bring the America up to international standards of what it takes to form unions. The reason why in most of the world, more of their workforce is organized into unions is because they have a way of working, of getting into unions and drive. And I'll say this: you go to like Europe, the stuff that we have to do as unions versus what they do, it's night and day. They don't even bargain over wages. Whatever wage they get as a union, everybody gets. I mean, in this country, if we were able to do that, we would eradicate like a good chunk of poverty. More people would be in the middle class, and America would not have the financial instability on an individual level that we have now. And the PRO Act would lead to and start alleviating those problems. It would just level the playing field of power in the workplace.
How hopeful are you that, and I'm going to ask you about President Biden in a moment here, but certainly there's been a lot more talk now that certainly there's a Democrat in the presidency. There's Democrats control the House and Senate of raising the federal minimum wage, something that hasn't been done in over a decade. And of course, the $15 is the target there. How hopeful are you that that's actually going to happen? Because certainly that factors into these discussions about wages as well.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting. So I want to talk to you about one thing though that you said about, well, Joe Biden is a Democrat and Congress is Democrat. And when Jimmy Carter was in the White House and he had a Democratic Congress, they tried to have labor law reform. It failed. When Barack Obama came in, well, no, let me even go for that. When Bill Clinton came in, they didn't do actual labor law reform, but there was other types of reforms, like no replacement of striking workers and a few other things. That failed. When Barack Obama came in, we had what was called kind of the precursor to the PRO Act called the Employee Free Choice Act, or EFCA. Never came up for a vote. So just because there's a Democrat in the White House, yes, they tend to be better, especially on the federal level. Definitely, that's the case. They tend to be better to us. But just having a Democrat in the White House doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get what we need. I will say this: so if you you're talking about, places going, yeah, we need workers, and you're going around these areas and you're seeing $15, $15.50, things like that. The reason that's there is because workers have organized and they have struck. The fight for 15 has pushed a lot of employers to start saying, okay, well, we're going to do 15. So it's kind of, especially around these parts in New York where we have a higher minimum wage than the federal minimum wage, that makes a big difference, and it's easier to get to 15. If you're in Alabama, where the Amazon workers try to organize, they're at the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. So, but my thing, if you're talking nationally, is what's the difference between a worker here doing the same job for $15 an hour versus a worker in Alabama for $7.25 an hour? Basically less than half. And it's the same job, especially if you're in a Walmart or if you're in a Target or a Amazon or what have you. So the thing is that workers themselves organize and push the political system to do what's right. Now, will we get to a $15 minimum wage? It's really going to depend on this second stimulus, because supposedly the PRO Act's supposed to be in there. The minimum wage is supposed to be in there. Will it make it through? I don't know. It's really going to depend. But I'll say this: the AFL-CIO. I mean, in New York, we have Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, both supportive of labor's agenda. We end up doing thank you events for them usually, like thank you for doing this, thank you for your leadership, and what have you. And because it's so close in the Senate, and we were just saying how the Senate works and the rules and what have you, you have Kirsten Sinema of Arizona and I've got Manchin's first name from West Virginia. Joe Manchin from West Virginia. These two senators, they're basically trying to figure out the politics of their state. Manchin originally said he wasn't going to run for re-election, but I don't know. He's kind of acting like someone that is. And Kirsten Sinema is in a very, very purple state. So she's probably thinking, I need to do this in order to garner other votes. So, it's going to be interesting. So do I think it'll get there? I'm not sure. But this is going to play out. first I got to get the bipartisan bill, that everybody wants passed, and hopefully that'll happen soon. And then they're saying maybe by October we'll have the other one passed. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah. With that infrastructure deal, certainly there's, when you talk about infrastructure and you're investing, billions and billions of dollars, certainly there's jobs that are created with that. How important is that for the labor movement, especially those building trades and construction
Oh, yeah.
guys? They obviously these jobs are important, especially at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, yes, the building trades. I mean, and let me say this: we have neglected our infrastructure for many, many years. It's time that we have, I mean, where the rest of the world has continually invested in their infrastructure, we haven't, and we need to do that. But we also need to just, I mean, and that's where I think, that's the more traditional infrastructure, the investment that you're going to see in the first bill, the bipartisan bill. The second bill is the other infrastructure, because it's not just about roads, bridges, rail, all that stuff. It's really about what workers need in order to succeed in their workplace. And I mean, a lot of the big issues is childcare. I mean, I see it in my union, 1199. Healthcare workers with, the need to, making sure that we have a system there so that kids can, not only be in a safe place, but also a place where they can learn and grow. To have the investments there, investments in healthcare, because to be honest, our employer-based healthcare system really doesn't help the larger community. I mean, if you have a union, you have good health benefits that you fought for, amen to you. But everybody should have those benefits. It shouldn't, especially that's the one thing, that I'm really hoping is the expansion of the Affordable Care Act, the expansion of Medicare with, especially, with hearing aids, vision benefit, dental benefit. These are very important things that people need in order to have a life and to really have a community where it's not just about you going in, clocking out. It's what type of life are you going to live? And that human infrastructure needs an investment too. So I'll be very excited, once they start doing a lot of the stuff that they want to do. You're already starting to see it with the American Rescue Plan monies that are being pushed out there. But even that isn't just about building things. It's about giving people some help on their rent, giving people help on, even things like home improvements, things like that. Look, even the stimulus, my wife and I were able to do some home improvements because of the stimulus. So that's putting money back out, and it's giving people to work. And that's really what we want. We want people to work, because then, people are working, they're productive, they put money out to the community, and that goes around our community, especially when for us, we hired a local contractor. So the local person, that person had 3 people on his crew. They were doing the work, and they were, and they're going to go out and spend the money locally.
With President Biden, he obviously took office in January. What do you hope to see out of President Biden as it relates to the labor movement? I know that we've talked about some federal issues already, but is there anything aside from that we didn't discuss that you hope he tackles during his presidency?
A bunch of things, but let me just say this first. He has been probably, at least rhetorically, the most pro-union president we've had probably since Franklin Roosevelt. So right there, I mean, and not to disparage any other presidents that have been in there, that have been, there've been some that have been very positive towards labor, many, and others have been hostile towards labor. But he has been rhetorically the best and most pro-union president since Franklin Roosevelt. His moves on the National Labor Relations Board are welcome, and we are thrilled by those, replacing people who were anti-worker, absolutely positively anti-worker. And especially one of the, the counsel to there actually comes out of my union. It's this person I know, so it's kind of cool. I'm some, that we're not close friends, but we know each other, so it's kind of cool. So those are the good first steps. making the PRO Act a priority is so important, because unless we make it easier for workers to organize, we're going to have the same problems over and over again. The labor movement, which has changed so much, like I've been in the labor movement for 23 years, it's not the same labor movement that it was 23 years ago, both for the good and bad. There's been positive changes, not so positive changes, especially when it comes to density and the types of workers that are in the labor movement. I mean, so that, we need to make sure that we have the ability to organize workers in a real way. And Joe Biden hopefully can help bring that to pass. So, that's why I hope that's part of the infrastructure bill, or at the very least, if they can, do something about the filibuster, so that if they want to bring it up as a standalone bill, they can as part of a filibuster reform or something like that.
I'll close with this because I think in the past I usually lead off with this, but obviously a lot of different issues to talk about. But what is the state of the labor movement in Central New York, and what do you think it'll look like over the next year before we meet again for this podcast next Labor Day?
That's a good question. So I think that the overall state of labor is that our organizations are all busy. We're dealing with so many issues. And I'll say this, COVID really dominates the conversation. The thing we're dealing with now are mandates, which is a tough issue for us, because at first it was employer mandates. And unless you had a union, you had no recourse on that. If employer says, you have to mandate it to work here and you don't have a union, you're what's known as an at-will employee, which means you work at the will of the employer. And, those people had no recourse. For us, we could say, nope, this is a item of bargaining, that we have to bargain over this in order for you to institute any sort of program for this, and gives workers at least, some say in how that program is put. But now you're seeing governmental mandates. And, to be honest with you, when it comes to governmental mandates, we're limited. Only thing we could do is try to work with the employer to try to make sure it's done in an equitable way, especially because you got certain people with medical excuses or religious exemptions or things of that nature, that we have to make sure those are respected. But it's tough. It is very tough because, and it's this whole balance between the individual rights and the public health needs. And it's really, really tough. And, we're still, so as a union, and because don't forget, NYSA came out against mandating vaccines, but now Onondaga County has one for educators. New York City just instituted it. I think you're going to see more and more of these going along. So actually, I think it'll be very interesting how Governor, starting tomorrow, Governor Hochul will deal with it, especially seeing how Governor Cuomo dealt with a lot of these issues, style-wise, how she'll deal with some of these. So, but that's what's dominating labor right now. It's all about COVID. It's making sure our workers are safe at the workplace. It's making sure that we have a voice. And I'll say this, these struggles that we have, especially around the employers, and about how employers try to take advantage of situations like this sometimes to try to get more out of labor, to try to, get wage concessions and things like that. We are fighting a big struggle, and our thing is we are not going back to the way things were before the pandemic. We're determined to create a new world where workers have respect.
Thanks again to Mark Spadafore for joining me on the podcast. I always look forward to this Labor Day episode. I hope it's informative for listeners. I know Mark enjoys it. He's usually the one who initiates the scheduling of it because he is excited. It was really his idea, so I have to give him credit for this. But again, it's an episode I always enjoy. So appreciate all of those who listen to it. I did want to address a couple of items before I wrap up this podcast. One is this is a return for me. I haven't recorded a podcast in a while, so in a way I'm appreciative of Mark for that reason. because I haven't recorded one in months. And so this was an opportunity for me to get back in the swing of things, and I enjoy it. I want to keep this going. I do plan on releasing new episodes weekly. It's just been a challenging time with the work demands. This podcast, when I first started this idea a few years ago, I didn't have as much to balance as I do now. Certainly, the COVID-19 pandemic factors into this now, but it has been a busier time, and that makes the podcast really less of a priority, quite frankly. But I do want to try and release new episodes. And so my goal going forward is to release new episodes every Tuesday. The reason for that is that it's earlier in the week, and I think that as the week goes on, it becomes harder and harder to really focus on, doing all the things that you have to do to put this podcast together. The editing, you obviously have to do an interview, so that could take a half hour or more. So really what I want to do going forward is to release those earlier in the week, because that'll give me some time at least. Mondays tend to be, and I'm knocking on wood as I say this, tend to be really kind of the slowest day of the week, quite frankly. So that should give me enough time to put the podcast together. That and the following week, of course, to put the podcast together, edit it, and then upload it so it's ready to go Tuesday morning. I do want them available as early as possible on Tuesdays, so we'll take it from there. But that's the plan going forward. I do enjoy doing this. I really love this platform. I wish I had more time for it. I would do it every day, quite honestly. But with the schedule, with the demands of the job at the moment, it's tough to do. But I do want to do this because I think it's a way to supplement my coverage, especially the political coverage, but also it gives me a new outlet to really tell stories, and that's something that I really like about it as well. So plan for that going forward every Tuesday. I hope to have new episodes of the podcasts out. And again, thanks to Mark for being a great guest and joining me for the Labor Day episode. I believe this is the third one we've done. So it's always great to chat with him about all things Central New York labor. A final thing I wanted to talk about is something you may have seen. I know that there's a lot of people who follow me on Twitter who listen to this podcast. And on Saturday, I wrote that I'm taking a break from Twitter. That was a tough thing to do, something I didn't want to do necessarily. I didn't know at the time how long I wanted to stay away. It was something that I knew I needed to do, but I didn't know how long would be appropriate. I figured that in time I would learn, how long I needed to stay away. And I will say, now that I'm on day 4 of this kind of Twitter exile, I won't be away for long. I will return, but it'll be different. One of the things that I have learned through this pandemic is that, I really need to prioritize myself. And I think that there are certain things that are easy to be, all consuming. And politics is certainly one of those things. And there are people, including myself, passionate about politics, and every hour of the day that we're awake, we spend talking about the news or talking about various issues or whatever it might be. But it's not the healthiest thing. It's one thing to have a passion for something, it's another thing to have an obsession. And I think that one of the problems, quite frankly, with our politics today is that, there is a difference there. And the people who become obsessed with it tend to really, I think, hurt the discourse. Because then it's, if you don't agree with me, if you don't do what I say, then you become a target. When I was reporting early on in the pandemic, because this is really where my view on these things changed. There was a lot with social media I was willing to tolerate, because especially with Twitter, I just love the interaction. I've met a lot of people through Twitter, on a professional basis. These are great people. I've had lunch with them. They have all different kinds of views and backgrounds, and I've really appreciated the conversation, and in some cases the friendships that have come out of that. It's been great, but I do think that there are certain lines that need to be drawn now, and I say that because of my experience reporting on the pandemic. That's really changed my opinion on this, as I mentioned. I don't have an active Facebook presence as a journalist. I keep a personal page. I have some friends on there, but I keep it pretty locked down and only let certain people in. And so from that standpoint, I'm not active on Twitter or on Facebook in that sense. But my work through The Citizen is posted to Facebook. And for years, because one of my other jobs at The Citizen is to be the online producer, for years I have defended my colleagues' work on that platform, in the comments section. And, that brought a certain level of stress with it, because usually you're commenting or replying to a comment because someone said something that made you angry, or something that was false that you have to correct. Could be any number of things, a combination of those things, whatever. And so there has been a lot of that over the years. During the pandemic, though, it became not only what I just mentioned, but also, these became critiques of my work, and I use critique there, and it's probably not appropriate. More of an attack. I'm someone that my dad taught me early on, because he was my coach in soccer, and of course my father, that constructive criticism is a good thing. And I agree with him, and that's something that I have taken with me through life. But there is a difference between constructive criticism and really what are attacks. These are people that they might be criticizing your work, but the underlying basis for that is that they either don't like you, they don't like what's being reported, and so their criticism, if you will, manifests itself as an attack, whether it's on you, the publication, whatever. And so I reached a point where I just couldn't deal with that anymore. It just became overwhelming, because day after day, when you're reporting on COVID, the same people would pop up and chime in and, blame the media, blame anybody else that disagreed with them. And that was really, for me, the tipping point where it was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. And it was actually, my doctor that recommended, hey, look, it's not worth it. It's not worth the time and energy when these people aren't going to change their minds. They're out to attack you, and so it's essentially, why bother? And it's better to just stay away from that. And with Twitter, it wasn't as bad, but the difference is that it can come at you directly. There, I have an active presence. People know how to reach me, and so it wasn't so much the critiques or anything related to that, but just the overwhelming sense of people have access to me through there, whether it's through my mentions, my direct messages, whatever it might be. And, that's something that I've in the past I've viewed as a benefit, but recently have come to view it as a detriment. And with Twitter, I just decided that, I need to step away from this for a while. For one thing, to just take a break from the platform. There have been a few moments during this break. Again, I say day 4. People have actually messaged me. I don't think they saw the tweet I put out on Saturday. Probably bad timing on my part, but that's when I decided to do it. They messaged me about different things, and so I don't hold that against them. They probably didn't see it, but that just shows you the how I've used that as a communication platform. That's, for a lot of people, that's the primary way for them to get a hold of me. But the I guess costs of that platform started to outweigh the benefits. And this is something I actually thought about deleting my Twitter account months ago. And it was almost like a New Year's resolution type thing, but I decided, no, I'll keep it going because, as I just highlighted, this is a way for me to communicate with some people, not in a public forum, private messages. And I set up interviews with them. I discuss stories with them. It's a way for them to communicate with me in that way, an alternative to email, I would say. So that was a decision I made then, but kind of the alternative there was to take a break. And I thought about it at different points, pulled the trigger, so to speak, on Saturday, because again, I reached that tipping point, similar to a tipping point I reached with Facebook, but it's tougher with Twitter because, as I've outlined, this is a way that people talk to me. Facebook, not so much. Like I said, I have a personal Facebook account. I do use that from time to time to communicate with sources and people I know, but Twitter is really where a bulk of that activity happens for me, professionally speaking. So, that tipping point on Twitter, was really a culmination of things. I can't point to any one thing, but I just needed a break from it. And, as I said, it's not going to last long. I do think, though, that when I come back, there's going to be some different rules, and I'm not going to bore you with those details, but, it's something I chose to talk about because it has been, it has been difficult through the pandemic. I know there are a lot of people in my sphere, personally and professionally, who have made some changes to their lives, whether it's a new job, move, a physical move where they're leaving a place that they've lived in for many years and going elsewhere. Could be any number of things. I mean, my wife and I are expecting our first child, so that's a pretty big deal, and that was part of the calculus here with this this decision to take a Twitter break. Was, I want my daughter to be raised in a world that's better than the one I came up in, and I think that's made more difficult by social media. I have a lot of criticisms of these platforms, especially Facebook and what goes on there. But Twitter is certainly not an innocent party here either. And some of it's not even, abuse or harassment or anything like that. Some of it is more related to what people apparently expect of me on that platform and how people use it to communicate with me. And those are the things that going forward, I'll probably have less tolerance for. One of the things is that, I'm not a fan of people using that to tell me how I should be doing my job or what questions I should be asking or, what I need to be writing about more. When in a lot of cases, they aren't paying attention to what I've been doing, or they don't know what I've been doing. I don't, on Twitter, I don't use that to broadcast my daily activities. Certainly I share stories on there. I'll share important details that come across my desk on a daily basis, but I've never used it as a way to say, I'm awake at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, and at 8:30 a.m. I just received an email, things like that. In the course of my day, I'm communicating with all sorts of different people, elected officials included, candidates included, about the issues of the day or stories that I'm working on. As I record this, it's almost noon on Tuesday, and this morning I have sent out multiple emails to different people for stories that I've been working on, some in politics, some not, but I hope that gives you an idea that, hey, if there's a reason you don't see me much on Twitter during the course of the day, it's because I'm working on stories. And in fact, I think if you look at my Twitter activity during the pandemic, especially over the past 12 months, you'll notice that there are these periods where I'm not as active during the day. And there's a reason for that. It's because I'm working on a story, I'm interviewing people, whatever it might be. So this idea that someone, I've been doing this job for a dozen years. So the idea that someone who's never done this job and is telling me on Twitter what I should be asking, what I should be doing, is just to me insulting, quite frankly. And I think it suggests that I'm somehow not doing my job if I'm not doing what they're telling me to do. I think that's a false premise. And going forward, I'm going to keep that out of my feed, whether that means muting people, blocking them. I'll do what it takes to keep that stuff out of my feed because, it's not a good feeling when people contact you and maybe their intentions aren't, negative, but it does come across that way when, you see that message and it's like, what, do these people honestly think I can't do my job? But there's other parts of it too. It's not just limited to those types of interactions. There's the almost daily getting caught in the crossfire, whether it's you writing a story or, mentioning the subject of a story or something and, people chime in and you get caught in the crossfire of that. that's something I'm not interested in either. And there's other things too that I don't like about the platform. But I'm not going to bore you with those details. The gist of this is that going forward, I will be looking for more positive interactions on the platform. Communication is always welcome. I have, open DMs on Twitter. People should know how to reach me by email. A lot of people have my cell phone number, so there's a lot of different ways to reach me these days. But that to me is the important thing going forward, is that we focus on positive communications, or at least respectful communications. You might have a question about my work, and I welcome those questions, but I think where I have to draw the line is becoming the target of certain political strategies that somehow it's the media's responsibility to answer to those who are carrying out those directives, or those suggestions, I should say. They're not necessarily directives, but that's really where I'm at. Of course, there is negativity in social media, but like I said, I want to focus more on the positives. I think I'm doing great work. I'm trying to inform people about, redistricting and elections, and certainly COVID-19. But these like side conflicts I can do without, and I hate being kind of wrapped up in these different social media campaigns, if you will. I don't even really know what to call them anymore. They're not that organized, but random people that want to chime in with different takes. To me, it's just unnecessary to have to deal with, and like I said, I've phased out a lot of that from Facebook. I just don't read those comments anymore. And it may get to that point with Twitter that, mute, block, whatever it's going to take. But it's for my well-being. It's for a more positive experience. It's basically for me to be able to justify keeping Twitter. Because if it continues, then I'll just get rid of it, like I really have with Facebook. And when I say get rid of it, basically keep my involvement to a minimum, where I'll have a presence, but my use of that will be minimal. So I'll be back on Twitter probably in the next few days. But I wanted to say this. I will tweet some things out about it, but that's how I feel about it. I have enjoyed using Twitter. I will continue to use Twitter, but I'm looking for those positive interactions. And I'm not trying to be idealistic here. I am a realistic person, but I think too often there are people who lean toward the negative, or just love the chaos or love the conflict. And to me, I'm just not interested in those things anymore. You can have those interactions all you want, but I don't wish to be involved in any way. So with that, I'll wrap up this edition of the Eye on New York podcast. I will be back next week. I am working on a couple of guest ideas, so we'll see who comes first, but hope to have a guest next week and in the weeks to come, and really look forward to getting this podcast off the ground again as we head into what promises to be a busy 2022. So again, thanks so much for listening. Thanks again to Mark for joining me on this Labor Day episode, and I'll talk to you next week.